Rich man abandons sick horse until a humble man discovers something hidden in it. Frank Miller walked through the dry fields of his small property in Lexington when he saw something that broke his heart. In the neighboring pasture, owned by the wealthy rancher William Thompson, a brown horse stood alone under the scorching sun, its bones visible and barely able to stay on its feet. The animal had been abandoned there 3 days earlier after veterinarians diagnosed it with an incurable illness. William Thompson, owner of one of the largest ranches in the region, simply ordered the horse to be left behind, claiming it wasn't worth spending money on a doomed animal. Frank, at 68, had spent his entire life caring for animals. His calloused hands knew every movement, every gesture that could soothe a suffering creature. As he approached the fence separating the properties, something caught his attention. The horse, despite its weakened state, lifted its head and looked him straight in the eyes. "Hello, buddy," Frank whispered, reaching his hand over the fence. "What did they do to you?" The horse slowly approached, each step seeming to require superhuman effort. When Frank touched its forehead, the animal lowered its head, as if understanding that someone finally cared. "Frank, what are you doing over there?" The rough voice of Betty, his wife of 45 years, echoed across the field. She approached carrying a basin of wet laundry. "This horse is suffering, Betty. I can't just ignore it." "It's not our problem," she replied, but her voice lacked its usual firmness. Betty had also noticed the animal's pitiful state. "You know we don't have money to care for a sick horse." Frank didn't answer right away. He kept stroking the horse's muzzle, feeling its weak, uneven breath. That's when he noticed something strange, an old scar on the horse's neck, partially hidden by its mane. When he touched that spot, the horse reacted oddly, not in pain, but as if it triggered some memory. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. That same day, on the other side of town, Elizabeth Thompson arrived from New York after 3 months studying business administration. The 28-year-old had grown up on that ranch, and her first stop was always the stable to visit Thunder, the horse she'd received as a gift when she was 15. "Dad, where's Thunder?" she asked, as soon as she entered the grand house, an imposing structure that reflected William's business success. William Thompson, a 55-year-old man with graying hair and an authoritative presence, didn't look up from the papers scattered across his desk. "The horse got sick. We had to get rid of it." "What do you mean, get rid of it?" Elizabeth felt her blood run cold. "It was sick, Elizabeth. The vet said there was no cure, no point wasting money on a doomed animal." Elizabeth ran out of the house, heading straight to the stable. She found only empty stalls where Thunder used to be. Desperate, she looked for Bob, the ranch's oldest handler. "Bob, where's Thunder?" The 60-year-old man lowered his head, avoiding her gaze. Bob had worked for the Thompson family for over 20 years and had watched Elizabeth grow up. "Miss, your father ordered the horse taken to the back pasture. Said," he hesitated, "said it was best to let nature take its course. He abandoned Thunder to die alone." Elizabeth's voice came out as a horrified whisper. Bob only nodded, unable to meet the eyes of the young woman he considered like a daughter. Elizabeth ran toward the mentioned pasture, but when she got there, she found only dry ground and some old footprints. The horse was no longer there. Meanwhile, Frank had made a decision that would change his life. Despite Betty's protests, he cut the fence separating the properties and led the horse to his small farm. The animal followed him docilely, as if it knew it was being saved. "Have you lost your mind?" Betty exclaimed, when she saw her husband settling the horse into the small shed where they usually kept the chickens. "Thompson will sue you for theft." "It's not theft to save a life," Frank replied firmly. "If he wanted the horse, he wouldn't have left it to die." Betty watched as her husband prepared a clean spot for the animal, using old straw and even one of her worn-out sheets as a blanket. She had known Frank long enough to realize she wouldn't be able to dissuade him. "At least promise me you won't spend the market money on medicine for this horse," she pleaded, though her voice already sounded resigned. Frank spent the first night awake, watching the horse's uneven breathing. He had prepared a mixture of water and sugar, remembering how his grandfather had cared for weakened animals decades ago. Hour after hour, he offered the liquid to the horse, which drank slowly. It was during one of these vigils that Frank noticed something even stranger. Whenever a car passed on the distant road, the horse turned its head in that direction, as if waiting for someone specific. And there was something in its eyes, an intelligence that seemed at odds with the terminal illness diagnosis. The next morning, Elizabeth appeared at the Miller's property. She had spent the whole night searching for information about Thunder's whereabouts and had learned from Bob that the horse might be with the neighbor. "Good morning," she greeted when she saw Frank in the yard. "My name is Elizabeth Thompson. I'm looking for a brown horse that might have wandered here." Frank looked at the elegant young woman, clearly nervous, and immediately knew who she was. He had seen Elizabeth a few times riding that very horse years ago, when she was still a teenager. "You're William Thompson's daughter," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, the horse. He's very special to me. My father said he was sick, but I need to see him." Frank led her to the small shed where he had spent the night caring for the animal. When Elizabeth saw Thunder, her eyes filled with tears. "My God, what have they done to you?" she whispered, rushing to hug the horse's neck. The animal, which had remained listless all morning, immediately lifted its head and whinnied softly, as if recognizing its old companion. "He's not sick," Frank said after observing the horse's reaction. "He's malnourished and sad, but not sick." "How can you be sure?" "Child, I've been tending to animals for 50 years. A sick animal doesn't react like that. Your horse was just abandoned." Elizabeth felt a mix of relief and anger. If Thunder wasn't really sick, why had her father lied? "Can I keep him here for a few days?" she asked. "I'll pay for all the care and feed." Frank shook his head. "No need to pay, but you should talk to your father about why he did this." Elizabeth spent the rest of the morning in the shed, watching Frank tend to Thunder with a gentleness her father had never shown. The simple man, with his patched clothes and calloused hands, treated the animal like family. "Do you have experience with horses?" she asked. "My grandfather was a cowboy. I learned from him as a boy. Horses are noble creatures, miss. They feel everything we do, sometimes even more." As they spoke, Betty approached, carrying a bowl of oatmeal. "For the horse," she explained, a little embarrassed. "I thought he might like it." Elizabeth smiled, realizing that despite her complaints, Betty also cared about Thunder. The horse ate the oatmeal eagerly, showing more energy than he had in days. Frank took the opportunity to examine the scar on the animal's neck more closely. "This mark here," he said, pointing to the scar, "looks too precise to be an accident, almost surgical." Elizabeth bent down to look closer. It was true. The scar had a very specific rectangular shape. "I never noticed that before," she admitted. "I always thought it was from a fight with other horses." "No," Frank shook his head. "This was done by humans." At that moment, the sound of an approaching car interrupted the conversation. William Thompson stepped out of a black pickup truck, accompanied by two men Elizabeth didn't recognize. "Elizabeth," he shouted, "what are you doing here?" The young woman stood up, bracing for confrontation. "Taking care of Thunder, since you abandoned him to die. That animal is sick. Dr. Anderson was very clear about the diagnosis." "What disease?" Elizabeth challenged, "because he seems to be recovering just fine." William ignored the question and turned to Frank. "You're on private property and you removed an animal without authorization. That's theft." "You abandoned this horse," Frank replied calmly. "If he were valuable, you wouldn't have left him to die." "That doesn't matter. He's still my property." One of the men with William stepped forward. Elizabeth recognized him as Dr. Anderson, the ranch's veterinarian. "Mr. Miller, as the attending vet, I can confirm this animal needs to be put down. He poses a risk to other horses in the area." Frank stared at the vet. "What disease exactly?" Dr. Anderson hesitated for a moment. Progressive neurological degeneration, highly contagious." "Interesting," Frank said, "because I know that disease, and the symptoms don't match what I see in this horse." Elizabeth noticed the exchanged glances between her father and the vet. Something was off, something they weren't saying. "Dad, I want a second opinion," she declared. "If Thunder is really sick, another vet can confirm it." "That's unnecessary," William snapped. "Dr. Anderson is more than competent." Then why are you afraid of a second opinion? William's discomfort became obvious. He looked at the men with him and gave an almost imperceptible signal. Elizabeth, we're leaving, now. I'm not leaving Thunder. This isn't up for debate. The two men stepped forward, clearly ready to use force if needed. Frank moved between them and Elizabeth. Gentlemen, I suggest you leave my property before I call the police. William laughed bitterly. Police? You think they'll take your word over mine? It was Betty who broke the rising tension. Frank, she called from the porch, there's a young lady here to see you. Everyone turned to see a woman around 25 approaching. She carried a vet's bag and walked straight to the group. Sorry to interrupt, she said, but I got a call about a horse needing a second opinion. My name is Rachel. I'm a newly licensed veterinarian. Elizabeth looked surprised. I didn't call any vet. It wasn't you, miss, Rachel smiled. It was Bob, the stable hand at Thompson Estate. He was worried about the situation. William's face flushed with anger. Bob has no authority to call any vet. Actually, sir, Rachel replied politely, anyone can request a second opinion if they suspect animal neglect. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, Dr. Anderson stepped forward, clearly nervous. Dr. Rachel, there's no need for an examination. I've already diagnosed the case, and the animal needs to be put down. How nice to find you here, Dr. Anderson. Rachel replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. We can compare our evaluations. The veterinarian walked toward the shelter where Thunder was kept, followed by everyone present. Frank Miller watched as she approached the horse, her experienced hands examining every part of the animal. Interesting, she murmured after a few minutes. This horse shows signs of severe malnutrition and stress, but I see no evidence of neurological disease. You're obviously mistaken, Dr. Anderson interrupted. It's a degeneration that only shows up in specific tests. What tests? Rachel asked. Because from what I observe, motor coordination is perfect. The pupils react normally to light and there are no involuntary tremors. Dr. Anderson began to sweat visibly. The tests were done at a private lab. I don't have the results here. I understand, Rachel nodded. Then I suggest we repeat the tests. I can collect samples right now. That won't be necessary, William Thompson cut in sharply. Doctor, let's go. Wait. Elizabeth Thompson held her father's arm. If there's no problem repeating the tests, why the rush? William looked at his daughter with an expression she had never seen before, a mix of guilt and desperation. Elizabeth, you don't understand the situation. Then explain it to me. It was Frank who broke the awkward silence. Dr. Rachel, when you examined the horse's neck, did you notice anything unusual? The veterinarian turned her attention to the indicated area, examining the scar more carefully. There's definitely a surgical mark here, very precise. It looks like the mark of a microchip implant. Microchip? Elizabeth asked. Yes, some breeders implant identification chips in valuable horses, but this one seems different, larger than usual. Rachel carefully felt the area and confirmed her suspicions. There's definitely something implanted here. With your permission, I can make a small incision to examine it. Dr. Anderson practically shouted, "That's unnecessary and dangerous." Doctor, Rachel faced him, why are you so resistant to a simple procedure? The veterinarian looked desperately at William, who remained silent, clearly conflicted. Dad, Elizabeth said softly, please tell me what's going on. William Thompson, a man who had always projected strength and control, seemed to age 10 years in seconds. Elizabeth, the ranch's financial situation hasn't been good for months. What does that have to do with Thunder? The horse, he's worth a lot of money. Much more than you realize. Frank stepped closer, sensing they were finally reaching the truth. How much money? William hesitated before answering. Thunder is a direct descendant of Meteor, the national champion of 1985. His bloodline is worth over $500,000. Elizabeth felt her legs weaken. $500,000? The microchip contains all the genetic documentation. It's the most valuable proof of lineage we have. And what does that have to do with pretending he's sick? Rachel asked, starting to understand the situation. Dr. Anderson, realizing the ruse had been uncovered, decided to confess. The insurance. We had a policy on the horse. If he died of illness, we'd receive the full payout. But if he were put down due to neglect, Frank finished the thought, there'd be no payout. Exactly, Dr. Anderson confirmed, hanging his head. That's why we created the false diagnosis. Elizabeth looked at her father with a mix of disappointment and disbelief. Were you going to kill my horse for money? I wasn't going to kill it, William defended weakly. Just let nature take its course after the diagnosis. That's the same thing, she shot back, tears streaming down her face. Frank, who had silently observed the entire revelation, finally spoke. What if Mr. Thompson could keep the horse and solve his financial troubles without harming the animal? Everyone turned to him, surprised. What are you talking about? William asked. A horse with this bloodline can generate income through breeding. Instead of a one-time payout, you'd have a steady source of revenue. Rachel nodded eagerly. It's true, a stallion from Meteor's lineage could be worth far more alive than dead. But he's in poor condition, Dr. Anderson argued. Because he was neglected, Frank countered. 3 days of proper care have already shown significant improvement. Elizabeth looked hopefully at her father. Dad, we can try. I can help manage a breeding program. William seemed torn between relief and shame. Even if it were possible, I don't have the resources to run a breeding program. But I have the knowledge, Frank offered, and Dr. Rachel has the veterinary expertise. And I have the determination, Elizabeth added. Would it be a partnership? William asked hesitantly. It would be a second chance, Frank corrected, for all of us. Betty, who had been watching the conversation from the porch, stepped closer to the group. Frank, are you sure about this? We don't have any business experience. We have experience with love and dedication, he replied, glancing at Thunder. And sometimes that's worth more than all the money in the world. Dr. Anderson, still ashamed, offered, I can help with medical care at no cost as a way to make up for my mistakes. Rachel smiled. Everyone deserves a second chance, Doctor. William looked at the group forming around his daughter and the horse he had nearly condemned. I accept the partnership, but I want it clear. Elizabeth will have full involvement in all decisions. And Mr. Frank, too, Elizabeth added. He's the one who saved Thunder when all of us failed. Frank shook his head. I just did what any decent person would do. No, Elizabeth said firmly. You did what a special person would do. In the days that followed, the small Bennett property became a hub of activity. Rachel had confirmed that the microchip contained valuable information about Thunder's lineage, including genetic data that could interest breeders nationwide. Elizabeth had temporarily moved to New York to work remotely, spending mornings and evenings helping Frank care for the horse. The young executive discovered a passion for hands-on work she never knew she had. Miss, Frank said one afternoon as they brushed Thunder, may I ask you a personal question? Of course. Why is this horse so important to you? It's not just about the money, is it? Elizabeth stopped brushing and gazed into the distance as if reliving old memories. My mother died when I was 15. Cancer. It was a hard time, and Thunder was my only escape. When I rode him, I could forget her suffering, the pain of watching her fade. Frank paused to listen. The day she died, I spent the whole afternoon riding Thunder, crying into his neck. He stood still, quiet, as if he understood my grief. Animals have that sensitivity, Frank agreed softly. After that, my father was never the same. He became obsessed with work, with money, as if it could bring my mother back. And I went to study in New York to escape it all. And now I realize I almost lost the only thing that still connected me to my mother. If it weren't for you... Frank placed his hand on the young woman's shoulder. Your mother would be proud to see how hard you fought for him. You think so? I'm certain. At that moment, Betty appeared carrying a tray with coffee and cornbread. You need to eat too, she said, but her tone had changed. The initial resistance had given way to genuine warmth. "Betty," Elizabeth said, "may I ask what made you change your mind about Thunder?" Betty smiled as she poured the coffee. 45 years married to this man taught me that when Frank decides to help someone, it's truly worth it, and you two have something in common. Us. You both lost your mothers very young. Mine died when I was 17. I know that pain." Elizabeth felt her eyes filling with tears. "I didn't know." "Pain is something you recognize in others," Betty continued, "and love too. You both love this horse in a special way." Frank smiled at his wife, grateful for her understanding. Betty's right. Sometimes circumstances bring us together for reasons we only understand later. Over the following weeks, Thunder showed remarkable recovery. His weight returned to normal, his coat regained its shine, and most importantly, his lively personality came back. Rachel confirmed the horse was in perfect health. It was during one of these vet visits that they discovered something unexpected in the microchip. "Strange," Rachel murmured as she examined the data on her laptop. "There's information here about more than one animal." "What do you mean?" Elizabeth asked. "The chip contains genetic data for Thunder, but also 3 other horses, all from the same bloodline, all listed as lost in accidents." Frank and Elizabeth exchanged worried glances. "Accidents?" Frank repeated. "According to these records, all other descendants of Meteor died under suspicious circumstances in the last 5 years." Elizabeth felt a chill down her spine. "That means that Thunder may be the last living descendant of Meteor," Rachel finished. "And that increases his value exponentially," Frank concluded. Just then, Elizabeth's phone rang. It was Bob, the ranch hand. "Miss, I need to talk to you urgently. Can you come here?" "What happened, Bob?" "It's about Dr. Anderson. I found some things you need to know." Elizabeth hung up and turned to the others. "Bob wants to see me at the estate. Says he found something about Dr. Anderson." "I'll go with you," Frank offered. "Me too," Rachel added. "If there's something strange about the other horses, I need to know." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers. Now, back to the story. When they arrived at the Thompson estate, they found Bob nervous, constantly looking over his shoulder. "Bob, what did you find?" Elizabeth asked. "Miss, I was cleaning Dr. Anderson's office and found some strange papers, documents about the other horses in the bloodline." He handed over a folder with several documents. "Look here," he pointed to a specific page. "This horse from Hope Ranch. It says he died of colic, but look at the date." Rachel examined the document. The date is 1 day after Dr. Anderson's visit. And here, she flipped through more papers. This other horse, same pattern. "What are you suggesting?" Elizabeth asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Dr. Anderson may have been involved in the disappearance of the other horses in the bloodline," Frank said carefully. "But why?" "To increase Thunder's value," Rachel explained. "The fewer descendants of Meteor there are, the more valuable he becomes." Bob nodded in agreement. "And there's more. I found this phone hidden in his desk." He showed an old cell phone. "There are messages about preparing the last horse and making sure it's the only survivor." Elizabeth felt nauseous. Was Dr. Anderson planning to kill Thunder too? "Looks like it," Bob confirmed, "but only after eliminating the competition." Frank took the phone and examined the messages. "There's a name that keeps appearing here. Richard Bennett. Anyone know him?" "Richard Bennett is a horse breeder from New York," Rachel said. "Very wealthy, very unscrupulous. I think he was paying Dr. Anderson to eliminate the competition," Bob suggested. Elizabeth sat down, trying to process everything. "So my father wasn't lying about needing the insurance money. He was being manipulated by Dr. Anderson." "Seems that way," Frank agreed. "Your father might have just been another victim." Just then, they heard a car approaching. Through the window, they saw Dr. Anderson stepping out of his pickup truck, accompanied by an unfamiliar man. "Hide the papers," Bob whispered urgently. "They can't know we've found out." Rachel quickly tucked the documents into her bag while Bob pretended to sweep the yard. Dr. Anderson entered the office with the stranger, who Elizabeth assumed was Richard Bennett. He was tall, well-dressed, with a smile that didn't inspire trust. "Miss Thompson," Dr. Anderson said with false warmth, "what a surprise to find you here." "I was just talking to Bob about caring for our other horses," she replied, keeping her voice steady. Of course. Let me introduce Richard Bennett, a highly respected breeder. He's interested in discussing the future of your unfortunate situation." Richard stepped forward with a predatory smile. "Miss Thompson, I heard about the misfortune with your horse. A real shame." "Misfortune?" "The terminal illness, of course." Dr. Anderson explained the situation. Elizabeth looked at Dr. Anderson, who avoided her gaze. "Actually, we got a second opinion. The horse is recovering very well." Richard's expression shifted subtly. "Second opinion? Dr. Anderson, you didn't mention that." "I didn't think it was relevant," the vet stammered. Rachel stepped forward. "I'm the vet who did the second evaluation. The animal shows no signs of a terminal illness." Richard studied Rachel with calculating eyes. "Interesting, and where is the animal now? Where is—" "In a safe place," Frank said firmly, "receiving proper care." "I see," Richard said slowly. "Well, if the horse is truly healthy, perhaps we can discuss a business transaction." "He's not for sale," Elizabeth said immediately. "Everything's for sale at the right price, miss, and I pay very well for unique horses." The way he said unique sent a chill down Frank's spine. "The horse isn't for sale," he repeated. Richard glanced at Dr. Anderson, who looked increasingly nervous. "Doctor, we need to talk privately." The two men stepped into another room, leaving Elizabeth, Frank, Rachel, and Bob alone. "We need to get out of here," Bob whispered. "That man doesn't take no for an answer." "I agree," Rachel said, "and we need to protect Thunder." Elizabeth looked out the window and saw Richard gesturing aggressively at Dr. Anderson. "Let's go. Now." They slipped away discreetly, but Elizabeth noticed Richard watching them from the window. Back at the Miller property, they found Betty in a panic. "Thank goodness you're back," she gasped. "A man was here looking for the horse, said he'd return with legal papers." "What did he look like?" Frank asked. "Tall, well-dressed, strange smile." "Richard," Elizabeth confirmed. "He's already been here." "But how did he know where to find Thunder?" Rachel asked. The answer came when they saw Dr. Roberto approached alone, head down. "Can I talk to you all?" he asked when he reached the group. "You've already said enough," Frank replied curtly. "Please, you don't understand the situation I'm in." Elizabeth stared at him. "Then explain it to us." Dr. Anderson took a deep breath before beginning. 5 years ago, Richard Bennett came to me with a proposal. He wanted to monopolize Meteor's bloodline. He offered a lot of money to ensure only one descendant survived. "And you agreed," Rachel said disdainfully. "I was deep in debt. My daughter needed an expensive surgery. Richard offered enough money to solve all my problems." "In exchange for killing innocent horses," Frank accused. "I never killed any horse," Dr. Anderson defended himself. "I just facilitated accidents." "That's the same thing." Dr. Anderson began to cry. I know it's unforgivable, but my daughter—" "What about Thunder?" Elizabeth asked. "What was the plan for him?" "Richard wanted me to eliminate Thunder too, but make it look natural. Then he'd buy the breeding rights to his father's bloodline for a fraction of their real value. That's why the false diagnosis," Frank realized. "Exactly. But when I saw how much you all cared for the animal, when I saw he was really improving—" "You had a crisis of conscience," Rachel finished sarcastically. "Yes, and now Richard is furious. He invested a lot of money in this plan." "What does he plan to do?" Elizabeth asked. "I don't know, but he mentioned other ways to solve the problem." Betty, who had been listening from the porch, stepped forward. "Do you think he might try to steal the horse? Or worse," Dr. Anderson confirmed grimly. Frank looked at Thunder, grazing peacefully, unaware of the danger around him. "We need to protect him." "How?" Elizabeth asked. "We can't fight a man with Richard's resources." It was Rachel who suggested a solution. "We can go public. If the story about Meteor's bloodline and the suspicious deaths gets out, Richard won't be able to act openly." "But we need concrete proof," Frank pointed out. Dr. Anderson hesitated before speaking. "I have recordings. All my conversations with Richard, I kept them as insurance." Why should we trust you now? Elizabeth asked. Because, Doctor, Anderson looked her straight in the eye. If I don't do the right thing now, I'll never be able to face my daughter again. Betty, who had remained silent, spoke up. Everyone deserves a chance to make things right. Frank looked at his wife, then at the group. Fine, but any attempt at betrayal? There won't be, Dr. Anderson assured. I swear. That night, as they planned how to expose Richard and protect Thunder, Frank noticed the horse was restless. The animal paced back and forth in the shelter, as if sensing danger. He feels something, Frank said to Elizabeth, who had decided to stay overnight to help keep watch. Do horses have that intuition? Animals always know when something's not right. As if confirming Frank's words, Thunder began to whinny softly, staring intently toward the road. Someone's coming, Betty said from the house window. They saw headlights approaching slowly, with the lights off. Hide the horse, Frank ordered. Quick! Elizabeth and Rachel led Thunder to a small grove behind the house, while Frank and Betty stayed to face the unwanted visitors. Two men stepped out of a dark car. One was Richard, the other, a tall, intimidating stranger. Mr. Miller, Richard said with false politeness. Good evening, we've come to collect our property. There's no property of yours here, Frank replied calmly. The horse, of course. I bought the rights from Mr. Thompson this afternoon. That's a lie. Richard smiled and showed a paper. Sales contract properly signed. Frank examined the document. The signature appeared to be William Thompson's. Even if it were true, the horse isn't here. My assistant here has quite a talent for finding lost things, Richard said, gesturing to the man accompanying him. The stranger began heading toward the shelter, but Betty blocked his path. We don't allow strangers on our property. Ma'am, I suggest you don't make this harder than it needs to be. That's when they heard sirens approaching. Two police cars stopped at the entrance of the property. Richard looked surprised at the approaching officers. What's the meaning of this? One of the officers, a middle-aged sergeant, stepped forward. Mr. Richard Bennett, we need you to come with us to answer questions about irregularities in animal transactions. This is ridiculous. I've done nothing illegal. The recordings suggest otherwise, the officer replied. Richard looked around and saw Dr. Anderson coming out of Frank's house. You, he said angrily. You turned me in. I did what I should have done 5 years ago, Dr. Anderson answered. As Richard was led away by the police, Elizabeth and Rachel returned with Thunder. How did you manage it? Elizabeth asked. Dr. Anderson called the police, Frank explained, and handed over all the recordings. Rachel approached the veterinarian. Thank you for doing the right thing. I still have a lot to make up for, he replied, but it's a start. In the weeks that followed, the story of Richard Bennett's conspiracy to monopolize Meteor's bloodline became national news. Several other breeders came forward as victims of similar schemes, and a widespread investigation was launched. William Thompson, initially implicated as a suspect, was cleared when it was proven he had been manipulated by Richard through financial blackmail. Dad, Elizabeth said during a difficult conversation, why didn't you tell me about the financial troubles? Because I wanted to protect you, William answered. Your mother always said you should grow up without worrying about money. But I'm not a child anymore. I could have helped. I know. It was foolish pride on my part. The reconciliation between father and daughter was gradual but genuine. William began visiting Thunder regularly, impressed by the animal's transformation under Frank's care. This man has a gift, he told Elizabeth during one of these visits. Thunder has never been better. Frank has something money can't buy, she replied. He truly cares. The success of Thunder's recovery began attracting positive attention. Ethical breeders from across the country sought Frank out to learn about his rehabilitation methods. It's not complicated science, he explained to visitors. It's patience, dedication, and a whole lot of love. Betty, initially resistant to all the commotion, found she enjoyed hosting visitors and sharing stories about Thunder's recovery. Who'd have thought our little farm would become a meeting place for breeders, she remarked one afternoon, serving coffee to a group of veterinarians who had come to learn about Frank's work. Rachel became a full partner in the project, documenting Frank's methods and developing protocols that could be replicated. Her graduate thesis would be based on Thunder's recovery. "You've revolutionized my understanding of equine rehabilitation," she told Frank. "I haven't revolutionized anything," he replied modestly. "I just listened to what the horse himself was telling me." Dr. Anderson, determined to make amends, offered his services free of charge to any animal in need of care at the Miller property. He also established a fund to help other veterinarians facing financial difficulties, preventing them from making the same mistakes he did. "The guilt for what I did will stay with me forever," he said during a conversation with Frank, "but I can try to ensure others don't go through the same." "Admitting the mistake is already half the road to redemption," Frank replied. "The other half is the daily work to make up for it." 6 months after the whole saga began, Thunder was unrecognizable. His weight had returned to ideal, his coat shone, and his lively personality had fully returned. Most importantly, he had shown he truly possessed the exceptional qualities of his lineage. "Look at how he moves," Elizabeth said during an exercise session. "It's like dancing." "He's always had that," Frank observed. "He just needed to be reminded of who he really is." It was during one of these sessions that they received an unexpected visit. A well-dressed man around 50 years old approached, accompanied by a young woman. "Sorry to interrupt," he said politely. "My name is Michael Stewart. I'm a horse breeder from Kentucky. I came to meet the famous Thunder." "You're welcome," Frank replied. "How can we help you?" "Actually, perhaps I can help you. This is my daughter, Jennifer. She specializes in equine breeding programs." Jennifer stepped forward, observing Thunder with an expert eye. "Truly impressive," she murmured. "The proportions, the musculature, the presence. This horse is exceptional." "Thank you," Elizabeth said. "We've worked hard on his recovery." "And you've done a magnificent job," Michael praised. "But I came here with a proposal that might interest everyone." Frank encouraged him to continue. "I have a ranch specialized in preserving rare bloodlines. I'm not a trader like that Richard Bennett. My interest is genuinely in genetic preservation." "What exactly are you proposing?" Rachel asked. "A partnership. Thunder would stay here under Mr. Frank's care, but he'd participate in a responsible breeding program. Each foal produced would be shared between us, ensuring the lineage continues properly." Elizabeth looked at Frank and then at her father, who had arrived during the conversation. "Would it be financially beneficial?" William asked, still cautious after the experience with Richard. "Very," Jennifer confirmed. "But more importantly, it would be ethically right. The goal isn't maximum profit, but responsible preservation." Michael handed over a folder with documents. "Here are our credentials, references from other breeders, and details of the proposal. Take your time reviewing them. There's no rush." After the visitors left, the group gathered to discuss the proposal. "It seems legitimate," Rachel said after examining the documents. "The references are impeccable, and it would be a way to ensure Meteor's lineage continues," Elizabeth added. "But would Thunder stay here?" Betty asked. "According to the proposal, yes," Frank confirmed. "He'd only travel occasionally for scheduled breedings." William, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "The decision should be Elizabeth's. The horse has always been hers." "No." Elizabeth shook her head. "The decision should be ours. All of us. We're a team now." The discussion went on for hours, weighing the pros and cons. Finally, they decided to accept the proposal, but with specific conditions. Thunder would never be away for more than a week. All transportation costs would be covered by Michael, and Frank would have veto power over any procedure he deemed harmful to the animal's well-being. "That's a fair deal." Michael agreed when they presented the conditions. "You clearly care about the animal's well-being above all else." The first breeding session for Thunder was scheduled for 3 months later, giving him time to fully adjust to his new routine and for everyone to feel comfortable with the arrangement. During this period, the Bennett property continued to receive visitors interested in Frank's methods. The humble man, who had never imagined becoming an authority on anything, discovered he enjoyed teaching. "The secret," he explained to each group of visitors, "isn't in complicated techniques. It's in observing, listening, and above all, respecting the animal." Betty developed a small side business, serving homemade meals to the visitors. Her kitchen became famous in the region, and she found a source of income she had never dreamed of. "Who would have thought my cornbread would make me famous?" she joked with Elizabeth. "You've always been special, Betty. Now the world is just catching on." Rachel completed her thesis with extraordinary data on Thunder's recovery. The paper was accepted for publication in international veterinary journals, setting new standards for equine rehabilitation. "Mr. Frank," she said, when she received the acceptance news, "you're going to be cited in scientific publications worldwide." "Is that good?" he asked, genuinely unaware of the magnitude of the recognition. "It's more than good. It's historic." Dr. Anderson found a new passion working with rehabilitation cases. Under Rachel and Frank's guidance, he developed protocols combining veterinary science with Frank's intuitive methods. "I never thought I'd learn so much from someone without formal training," he admitted in a conversation with Rachel. "Wisdom doesn't just come from books," she replied. "It comes from experience, observation, and the humility to learn." Thunder's first trip for breeding was an emotional event. Elizabeth insisted on accompanying him, along with Frank. "He'll be fine," Frank assured her during the trip. "He's a smart horse, he knows he's coming home." "How can you be so sure?" "Because home isn't just a place," Frank answered wisely. "It's where we're loved, and he knows he's loved here." At Michael's ranch, Thunder displayed exemplary behavior. The mare chosen for breeding was one of the finest on the property, and the connection between the two was immediate. "You've done extraordinary work," Jennifer praised. "Not just in his physical recovery, but in his emotional balance." "Frank is a born teacher," Elizabeth replied. "He's taught us all about patience and dedication." The return home was peaceful. Thunder showed clear signs of joy upon reuniting with his familiar surroundings and the people who had saved him. "Welcome back," Betty said, offering him a special apple she had saved. In the following months, the routine settled into harmony. Thunder made occasional trips for breeding, always returning stronger and more confident. The first inseminated mare confirmed pregnancy, validating the breeding program. "He'll be the first foal of a new generation," Rachel announced excitedly. "And the first of many," Michael added during a visit. "The waiting lists are already long." William, who had watched the entire transformation with growing admiration, made an important decision. "Elizabeth," he said during dinner at the Bennetts' home, "I want to officially transfer Thunder's ownership to you." "Dad, that's not necessary." "Yes, it is. You fought for him when I failed. Besides," he smiled, "you found a family here that I could never give you." Elizabeth looked around the table at Frank, Betty, Rachel, and even Dr. Anderson. She truly had found something special. "Then I accept," she said, "but on one condition. I want everyone here to be officially part of this family. Let's make our partnership formal." That's how the Keenor Thunder Horse Rehabilitation Centers was born, a non-profit organization dedicated to rescuing abandoned animals and developing humane care techniques. Frank was named technical director, Betty as administrative manager, Rachel as head veterinarian, and Dr. Anderson as research coordinator. Elizabeth took on the presidency, balancing her work in New York with her responsibilities at the center. "I never imagined my retirement would be so busy," Frank joked during the official opening ceremony. "And I never thought I'd learn to use a computer at 68, Betty added, laughing. The first foal from Thunder was born on a spring morning, healthy and strong. The arrival of the little filly was celebrated by the entire team and visitors who had followed the pregnancy. "She has her father's eyes," Elizabeth observed, moved. "And her mother's determination," Jennifer added, watching as the foal tried to stand just minutes after birth. "What should we name her?" Betty asked. "Hope," Frank said without hesitation, "because she represents the hope of continuing the bloodline and proof that love can overcome any hardship." The success of the breeding program and the rehabilitation center brought national recognition. Delegations from other countries came to study their methods, and Frank found himself in the unexpected role of an international speaker. "Mr. Miller," a reporter once asked in an interview, "what's the secret to your success?" "There's no secret," he replied simply. "Just love, patience, and the belief that every living being deserves a second chance. The question he was asked most often was about how his life had changed. Did you ever imagine saving one horse would change your life so much? I didn't just save a horse, Frank always answered. I saved an entire family. Thunder brought us all together. 2 years after the journey began, the center had become a global reference in equine rehabilitation. Over 50 animals had been rescued and rehabilitated, many finding loving new homes. Thunder, now 8 years old, was in peak condition and had sired 12 healthy foals. His bloodline was officially preserved, and the future of Cyril, Meteor's genetic legacy was secure. "Look at what we've accomplished," Elizabeth said one afternoon, watching Thunder play in the pasture with Hope and the other young horses. "No," Frank gently corrected. "Look at what he accomplished. We just gave him the chance to be who he always was." Betty walked over, carrying her usual tray of coffee and cake. "And look at what he taught us," she added, "that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as problems." Rachel, now a doctor and a recognized expert, agreed. Thunder showed us that real recovery goes far beyond the physical. He healed the Thompson family, brought our team together, and proved that business can be done with ethics. Dr. Anderson, who had found redemption through his work at the center, added, "And he taught me it's never too late to do the right thing." William, who had become a regular visitor, watched the scene with satisfaction. "My wife used to say animals have the power to mend broken hearts," he told Elizabeth. "Now I understand what she meant." "Mom would be proud," Elizabeth replied, resting her head on her father's shoulder. "I'm sure she is." That evening, as the sun set over the fields of Lexington, Thunder approached the group as he always did. Frank held out his hand, and the horse pressed his muzzle into his palm, a daily ritual that had become a symbol of their special bond. "Thank you, old friend," Frank whispered, "for teaching us that the real value of something isn't in what it can give us, but in what we can give to it." Thunder shook his head as if in agreement, then trotted happily toward the pasture, where his small family awaited him. The story that had begun with abandonment and despair had turned into a tale of redemption, family, and undeniable proof that love is the most powerful force to transform lives. The Thunder Horse Rehabilitation Center would continue to grow, saving more lives and spreading Frank's philosophy across the world, that every living being deserves love, care, and a second chance at happiness. And whenever someone asked Frank if he had saved Thunder, he would smile and reply truthfully, "He's the one who saved us. All of us." The end. Now tell me what you thought of this touching story of perseverance and love. Do you believe Frank made the right choice by saving Thunder? And what do you think about Dr. Anderson's transformation? Share your honest thoughts in the comments. We love reading every message from you. If this story touched your heart as deeply as it touched ours, don't forget to like this video and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other inspiring stories we've prepared just for you. Your presence makes every story even more special.